Inshallah, we'll go over the chapter of al-Ghasb. Al-Ghasb is, like I said, we can translate it as misappropriation, but misappropriation could mean different things. The mis in misappropriation could mean different things. Therefore, if you want to translate it in a way that is descriptive of the concept of al-Ghasb in fiqh, you will say wrongful, forceful, appropriation, or seizure of the property of others, and that would be al-Ghasb. Al-Ghasb is the wrongful, forceful appropriation. Every word is consequential. It has to be wrongful because there could be seizure, court-ordered seizure of the property of others. That's not wrongful. And also, ghanima, which is war booty, that's not wrongful because during the time of war, there are different rules that apply. So we're talking about the time of peace here, not the time of war. We're talking about, this being not court-ordered or anything. So it is wrongful. Also, the word forceful is consequential because it has to be forceful seizure of the property of others. If you do it by trickery, if you do it by deception, it's not considered a ghasb. I said in the footnotes that the same rules will apply. I meant similar rules will apply as far as this concept being inoperative in this particular area. You remember this concept that we stressed so many times before in Islamic transactions. It's called al-Kharaj bil-Daman. Profit follows liability. Profit and liability go hand in hand, hand in glove. They just go together. Profit is linked to liability. Liability is linked to profit. You cannot make profit in Islam unless you're liable. It's responsible investment. You can't be making profit without assuming the liability. Because with every profit, there is liability in this universe. So if you make the profit, who's basically responsible for the liability? If you make someone else responsible for the liability and you only get the profit, that's the essence of riba and that's the essence of economical aggression. So profit follows liability. Profit and liability go hand in glove. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. This particular principle is not operative anymore in this chapter. Profit does not follow liability. Because we will learn in this chapter that the person who had forcefully, wrongfully, and seized another person's property will not be entitled to profit, but will be liable. So in this case in particular, that's an exception. And this exception was basically is justified by the Quran and the Sunnah and justified by reason. Profit should not follow liability here. I will make you liable for my property if it is spoiled or if it is destroyed in your possession because you took it by force from me without my permission. So you should be liable. But at the same time, if you took it by force, you're not the rightful owner. So if you seize my apartment by force and rent it out, you're not entitled to the rent. I am entitled to the rent and to the apartment because you're not the rightful owner. So that disruption of this principle of for profit follows liability will not be only, that's what I meant by saying that the same rules will apply, will not only apply to ghasb, which is wrongful, forceful, seizure, or appropriation of someone else's property, but it will also apply if you take it by means of deception or cheating or some other wrongful means. But the ghasb per se, it's wrongful and forceful. It's like, take it by force wrongfully. Okay, so that is the definition of ghasb, and ghasb is haram for sure. The Prophet ﷺ said in Hajjat al-Wada', in the famous farewell pilgrimage, إن دماءكم وأموالكم وأعراضكم عليكم حرام كحرمة يومكم هذا في بلدكم هذا في شهركم هذا. Most verily, your lives, that's your blood, meaning your life, the sanctity of your bodies, your property, and your honor are sacred among you, like the sacredness of this day in this town and this month, just as sacred as the sacredness of this day in this town and this month. That's huge. The sacredness of this day in this town and this month. That's huge. دماءكم وأموالكم وأعراضكم. But it's also أعراضكم, which is also very important, and that's one of the differences between Islam and modern culture. Modern culture does not really consider the ird, the honor, the dignity of people to be of value. It's your body and your property that I cannot transgress. But your honor, your dignity is just like... But in Islam, the honor and the dignity of individuals, of human beings, is also as sacred as their body and their property. Because for some people, their honor, the value of their honor is greater than the value of their property. Okay, so we said that ghasb is the forceful, wrongful seizure of the property of others. We said that also if you take it by deception, it will not be called ghasb, but same rules will apply. And I mean by the same rules, the fact that liability here will not follow, that profit here will not follow liability. You will not be entitled to profit, but you will be liable all the way. And liable in ways that are also punitive, not just equitable, but also, but it is certainly equitable, but it's not just equity that we're looking for here. It is also that we want to penalize the wrongdoer. Because this is a different type of yad. We talked about different yads before, right? The two types of yad that we talked about, which is hand, basically being possession, different types of possession. When you possess something, you have your yad on it, your hand on it. It could either be yad amin, the hand of a trustee, or yad, what? Musta'ir, which is the hand of the borrower. So the yad amin, trustee. And many people are trustees. Many people are trustee. Al-Muda, which is the one that you leave your trusts with, like entrust your property with someone, that is muda. That's wadi'a. When you leave a trust with someone for safekeeping, that is called wadi'a, and the person is called muda. That is amin, that is trusted. Anyone who's trusted will not suffer any liability unless they committed what? Ta'addi or tafreed. Ta'addi is transgression. Tafreed is negligence. Ta'addi is when you do something you are not supposed to do. Tafreed is when you do not do something you were supposed to do. That is negligence or transgression. So, amin, the wakil, the agent, is yad amin or yad musta'ir, borrower. The wakil, the agent, if you're my agent and you have my property, amin, also trustee. Also, many things actually, there are so many things that are amin. Al-mudarib, amin or musta'ir. Even though he is making profit, mudarib is the one who gets into a partnership, mudaraba, partnership, where he's the worker, and you are the investor. If you give him money Is he ameen or musta'ir? Ameen also. He will only be liable, that worker will only be liable if he committed ta'addi or tafreed, if he committed transgression or tafreed, negligence. And even the musta'jir, the tenant, the tenant is ameen or musta'ir, although he is here in my apartment for his own sake. But again, you know, it is not like I did him a kindness by letting him use my apartment. He purchased the utility, he purchased the benefit, he purchased the usufruct, the usage of the apartment. He did not purchase the ayn, the property itself. He only purchased the usufruct, the usage of the apartment. Therefore, the apartment is still mine. I'm still responsible for this apartment, and because I'm making money out of it, then I should still be liable. Someone may say al-musta'ir is like this. He's only using the musta'ir, the borrower, he's only using the usufruct. The ayn, the property itself, is still mine. It's still the owner's. So why am I making the musta'ir a different category? Because here I lent to him that property to use it. That's an act of kindness. I'm not making profit out of this. Therefore, he should be liable for the loss, whether or not he committed transgression or negligence. The musta'ir, the borrower, should be liable whether or not he committed transgression or negligence, because simply I have, as an owner, given him this property for his own benefit. I am not making a benefit out of it. The banks, when you put your money, we talked about this before, when you put your money in a checking account, are they ameen or musta'ir? Are they borrower or trustees? We said that it looks like they are ameen, they are trustees. Technically they are ameen. Yet through istihsan, the scholars said, through juristic preference, which is the principle of equity, if technicality will cause you to deviate from the truth, deviate from the objectives of Sharia, then we will circumvent technicality by istihsan, which is juristic preference. They made the banks like borrowers, not like trustees, because then the banks do actually have some stake in this. They do use that money that you put in the checking account, and they do have some stake in this. So they should be treated like they are borrowers, not trustees. So they should be liable for the loss of the money if they lost it, regardless of transgression or negligence. I don't care how you lost it. You know, I am entitled to my money back. You borrowed my car. I don't care what happened. You could basically pursue compensation from whoever totaled the car, but that is your problem. You know, but I am entitled to my car back. But I rented the car out to you. That is not, then only you are responsible if you committed transgression or negligence, because I rented the car to you. It's not like I lent it to you. You're only responsible, or the apartment, or I left it with you, you know, for safekeeping. Then you're only responsible in the case of ta'addi or tafreed, transgression or negligence. So these are two different types of positions. When you possess a property, your yad, your hand, is either the hand of a trustee or the hand of a borrower. But then we have a completely different type of hand now, which is the hand of the misappropriator, the hand of al-ghasib, or the misappropriator. He will be treated, with sort of the expected equitable strictness. So he will be liable. no profit, no entitlement, only liability from here on. So once you have misappropriated the property, you'll be liable. So for instance, if you take my wood and make it into a door, make my wood into a door, and let's say the value of my wood was $80, and you made it into a nice door, and you spent from your money and you you just made it a really nice door. I get the door because it is ayn mali, it is my very property, the wood is my property, I get the door. Whatever appreciation that resulted from your work, the appreciation that resulted from your work, you are not entitled to it. I get it, appreciation. You know, you misappropriated my sheep, they gave birth, I get them. They got heavier, I get that. You rented out the apartment, I get the rent, etc., etc. But even when you did this to the door, I get. And then I can come back to you and tell you, you know, the door is now $150. It was $80. My wood was $80. The door now is worth $150. I can come back and tell you, you know, all the wood that was lost in the process, you have to pay for it. So on top of the door, you'll have to pay me for the wood that was lost in the process, because I didn't give you permission to lose that wood. So whatever appreciation happens belongs to the owner. Whatever depreciation happens is the liability of the misappropriator. Let us say, that even if you take my sheep and then my sheep, for instance, grow fatter, then I am entitled to that appreciation. If they then lose the weight, you're responsible for the liability, even if at the end the sheep are the same weight when you return them. Well, we have to figure it out. You know, if you know, certainly all of this, given that you know, anything that can be proven, then. Like if you misappropriated sort of a predator from me, and that what is it that you use for hunting, you know, and you taught that predator a skill that he had not, predators that are used for hunting, like people use predators for hunting. Dogs and other types of predators as well. Falcons and other types of predators as well. So if you teach them a skill and then they lose the skill, and then if you teach them a skill and then they lose the skill, you will have to pay for the depreciation, even though you taught them the skill, because when that falcon, for instance, was in your position and you taught the falcon a skill, I was the owner, you know. So when the falcon learned the skill, the value of the falcon became what, like 20% higher. I am entitled to that at this time. I'm really entitled. And at this time, when it was 20% higher, you should have returned the falcon to me. But if you did not, and the falcon then lost the skill, then you will be responsible for the depreciation. So it is certainly rules that will not apply to the trustee or the borrower. Disambiguation, like, something that is unclear.
So what if, going back to the sheep, what if the sheep gets sick naturally after you took it from?
You will be liable. You will be liable because it is not transgression or negligence that you're liable for. You're liable for any loss because that property should have not been with you in the first place. Then The Sheikh said, هو استيلاء الإنسان على مال غيره بغير حق. غصب is the wrongful seizure of another person's property by force. And we talked about, deception and cheating and how this concept of al-Kharaj bid-Daman or profit follows liability will also not apply in the case of deception or cheating, and the person will be treated like they are liable, but they're not entitled to any profit. Then the Sheikh said, وَمَنْ غَصَبَ شَيْئًا فَعَلَيْهِ رَدُّهُ وَأَجْرُ مِثْلِهِ إِنْ كَانَ لَهُ أَجْرٌ مُدَّةَ مقامه في يديه وإن نقص فعليه أرش نقصه. Which is what we said before. Whoever unlawfully appropriates something has to return it and pay the market value of the rental of the like for the period of its seizure, if it is worthy of rent or a wage. If the property decreased in value during its unlawful appropriation, the offender has to pay the compensation for the estimated decrease. So if the property appreciates, I am entitled as an owner. If the property depreciates, you're liable as the misappropriator. We said that misappropriation is haram. We said إن دماءكم وأموالكم وأعراضكم عليكم حرام كحرمة يومكم هذا في شهركم هذا في بلدكم هذا. This hadith is also very beautiful. So certainly Allah said in the Quran ولا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل, and that is larger in implication than forceful, wrongful seizure. ولا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. Or يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل in 2 verses means what? Do not devour, do not consume your property among yourselves بالباطل. بالباطل without validation. بالباطل falsely or without validation or unequitably or wrongfully or whatever. So that is bilbatil. Bilbatil then could mean what? Any bilbatil. It does not have to be the forceful, wrongful seizure. If it is done through cheating or through deception, then it is also bilbatil. This hadith also is very beautiful because this hadith is لا يحل, La, which means does not, yahel, become permissible, shay'un, anything, min, of, mal, property, imri'in, man, which means man or woman, muslimin, Muslim, which is inconsequential in this regard, as we said before. This is one of 2 things is meant here by the mention of Muslim, either to make it look uglier or because that is the sort of the norm or the usual thing that Muslims will be transacting with Muslims. But it is inconsequential, meaning that mafhum al-mukhalafa does not apply, divergent implication does not apply. It does not mean that the mal of the non-Muslim will be halal without their contentment. We're not talking about the time of war. We're talking about times of peace here, because the war booty is a different story. Except بطيب نفس منه, except with complete contentment, or طيب nafs means contentment of the nafs. His nafs is completely content, minhu, of him. So nothing of the property of a Muslim man will be permissible for another one except with complete contentment. This is not, so if the person is content, would the person be content if you cheated, deceived? Would the person be content if you took the property from them by sort of subtle coercion, not necessarily sort of force, but rather subtle coercion? Would the person be content if you took the money from them by haya, by, shying them into it? Certainly not. So you've got to ascertain that, the person is really content, pleased with giving you the money before you consume it without any guilt. Okay. Then the Sheikh said, so depreciation on the misappropriator, appreciation is for the owner. Then the Sheikh said, وإن زاد المغصوب رده بزيادته سواء كانت الزيادة متصلة أو منفصلة. If the unlawfully or wrongfully appropriated property increases in value or amount, it is to be returned with the increase, whether the increase was connected or separate. Whether the increase was connected or separate. And that's obvious. Increase is connected means what? The sheep got fatter. Increase is separate means what? You rented the apartment and you got, or the sheep gave birth. Or you rented the apartment and got the rent. So that is, all of the profit will be the owner's, expectedly. And then the Sheikh said, وَإِنْ زَادَ وَنَقَص رَدَّهُ بِزِيَادَتِهِ وَضَمِنَ نَقْصَهُ, which is the concept that we talked about before. If the unlawfully appropriated property incurs both an increase and a decrease in value or amount, then it is to be returned together with its increment of increase, be it caused by the offender or not, and he is held liable for any decrease in value or amount. So increase, you return it; decrease, you are liable for it as the misappropriator. He will give examples. He says, فلو نجر الخشبة بابا أو عمل الحديد إبرا ردهما بزيادتهما وضمن نقصهما إن نقصا. For instance, he says, when one illegitimately seizes wood and carpenters it into a door, or seizes iron and turns it into needles, one must return it with its increment, and one is fined for any reduction. Like I said, the door, in the process of making the door, you lost some wood, that is entailed in the process. You're liable for the wood that you lost because I didn't give you permission to make a door out of my wood. Let's say I wanted all of my wood. You're liable for the wood that is lost, and the appreciation by the craft is mine because you were not the owner at the time you did this. I am the owner. ولو غصب قطنا فغزله أو غزلا فنسجه أو ثوبا فقصره أو فصله وخاطه أو حبا فصار زرعا أو نوى فصار شجرا أو بيضا فصار فراخا فكذلك. The same applies when one misappropriates cotton and then spins it, or thread and then weaves it, or a garment and then, linguistically it could be shortens it, but he probably meant dyes it, because that is what they meant by qisara. Dyes it or tailors it. This holds true also for grains that become plants, seeds that become trees, and eggs that become hens. So eggs that became hens. If some of the eggs were spoiled in the process, you give me all the hens and you compensate me for the eggs that were spoiled. Even if the value of the hens is twice as much as the value of the eggs that you misappropriated, they're mine. It's mine. But then the eggs that were spoiled in the process, you're responsible for them. The seeds also that were planted, you planted the seeds, and now the crops that came out, they're mine, but the seeds that were lost in the process. And sometimes these things are not going to be demonstrable, like the loss and so on. So there is room for the judge here to impose a discretionary punishment on the misappropriator. But at any rate, the concept that you want to remember, because examples could be too many, the concept that you want to remember is that the misappropriator is liable for any depreciation and not entitled to any appreciation. All appreciation goes to the owner. All depreciation will be the responsibility of the ghasib, the wrongful appropriator. Then the Sheikh said, وإن تلف المغصوب أو تعذر رده فعليه مثله إن كان مكيلا أو موزونا وقيمته إن لم يكن كذلك ثم إن قدر على رده وأخذ القيمة. If the unlawfully appropriated property is damaged or it becomes impossible to return, then the offender must return its like. If it is a weighed or a measured property or its value otherwise, the offender should return it whenever possible and retrieve the paid value. Okay, so the explanation of this, you misappropriated some property from me. You have to return the exact property. Exact property. That is what is binding on you. You can't misappropriate property from me and then tell me, and this happens, by the way. You know, someone took like a computer from somebody by force, and then they wanted their computer, and he said, I'm just going to pay you no, you have to return the exact property. If the exact property is not present, is lost or damaged, what do you have to return? The exact like, if the property is what? Fungible, substitutable, things that are weighed or measured, things that are measured by weight or volume, things that are measured by weight or substitutable. So if it was 1 pound of wheat, that is fungible, substitutable. You could always, so you have to return the exact like, which is al-mithl. And that's a principle in fiqh. You know, if it is not the exact property itself, it is the mithl. If the property that was damaged or lost is non-fungible, meaning non-substitutable, a piece of furniture, for instance, then it is the value, the qima. So the ayn, which is the exact property, not there, the mithl, which is the exact like. Not possible because the property is not substitutable, then it is the value of the property. That's clear, right? Ayn mithl qima. Ayn mithl qima. Exact property, the exact like, or the value. Then the Sheikh said, وَإِنْ خَلَطَ الْمَغْصُوبَ بِمَا لَا يَتَمَيَّزُ مِنْهُ مِنْ جِنْسِهِ فَعَلَيْهِ مِثْلُهُ مِنْهُ وَإِنْ خَلَطَهُ بِغَيْرِ جِنْسِهِ فَعَلَيْهِ مِثْلُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ شَاءَ. If the wrongdoer mixes the misappropriated object with something of the same kind, he or she must pay its like from that mix. However, if it has been mixed with something different, the offender must pay the equivalent from wherever he or she wishes. So, you know, he's just trying to give you, like, they're trying to be practical and tell you what exactly you need to do. So you mix olive oil with olive oil of the same grade. You misappropriate like 1 liter of olive oil and mix it with olive oil of the same grade. It's simple. You get out of that mix, you give them back 1 liter of olive oil because it was mixed with olive oil of the same grade. You mix olive oil with canola or whatever oil. It's not going to be. You're not going to be able to. So what are you going to do? You give them the equivalent. You give them 1 pound of olive oil, not from that mix. And why we said from that mix in the first example? Because whenever you can return al-ayn, the exact property that was misappropriated, that is what is incumbent. To return the exact property that was misappropriated. You resort only to returning the like, the myth, the equivalent, When you cannot return the ayn. If the olive oil was mixed with olive oil of the same grade, can you return the ayn? Maybe not the exact ayn, because some of it will be mixed with the other olive oil, but at least you'll get some of that ayn. But if it was mixed with canola oil, you can't return the exact property, so you will have to return the equivalent. Then the Sheikh said, وَإِنْ غَصَبَ أَرْضًا فَغَرَسَهَا أُخِذَ بِقَلْعِ غَرْسِهِ وَرَدِّهَا وَأَرْشِ نَقْصِهَا وَأُجْرَتِهَا. Okay, so now we will talk about the fact that you compensate people for their property. One of the hadith, and keep in mind that the hadith in this particular chapter are not too many. They establish principles, and once you have understood those principles, the fiqh that developed has to be respected. Why? Because it was developed on the basis of the hadith. But they disagree among themselves also, meaning that it is not infallible. The fiqh that was developed after those hadith, derived from those hadith, is not infallible. Had it been infallible, they would have not disagreed among themselves. So the hadith are infallible. The fiqh that developed is not infallible. But the fact that it is not infallible does not mean that it should not be respected, because those are great scholars who have great understanding of those hadith, and they have great principles that they act by. And if it was left for the public to decide, they would not have those tracks, the grid, the mold, in which they can fit in, the hadith. The grid is absent, but those scholars have the grid. So when they get a hadith, they know where it belongs, and they know how it interacts with the other hadith, or at least, let's say they don't know in the sense of knowing, that is error proof, but in the sense they know much better than you at the end of the day, where it belongs, because they have the grid. But at the same time, the fact that it is not infallible gives flexibility to mujtahideen of all times to re-examine things, and to apply the principles to contemporary realities that may be completely different from the realities of their agricultural societies, for instance. So to apply the same principles to contemporary realities. So what hadith do we have? We have the common sort of the hadith that we mentioned, إن دماءكم وأموالكم عليكم حرام لا يحل شيء من مال امرئ مسلم إلا بطيب نفس منه. It's about equity in general. It's about the prohibition of aggression, the prohibition of misappropriation, the prohibition of wrongful doing, usurping the rights of others when it comes to their property. And these are general statements. But when it comes to this particular chapter, you have very few ahadith that belong to this particular chapter. One of those ahadith is this one. من اقتطع شبرا من الأرض ظلما طوقه الله إياه يوم القيامة من سبع أرضين. Man, he who اقتطع, or she who اقتطع means what? Misappropriated or seized. Shibran, a handspan. Min of al-ard, earth. ظلman, wrongfully. طوقه, Allah means Allah will surround him. إياه, with it. يوم القيامة, on the day of judgment. من سبع أرضين, to the depth of the seventh earth. To the depth of the seventh earth. So Allah will surround him with that one handspan of land that he misappropriated on the day of judgment. Suffocate him, with that one handspan of earth that he misappropriated on the day of judgment. So that is one hadith, and this was reported by Bukhari and Muslim from Sa'id ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu. So But then, you would expect that this, you would expect this, right? Islam is about equity, Islam is about justice. The specific rulings, the books that could be written on the chapter of ghasb come from these few ahadith, because those few ahadith establish the principles, and then the specific rulings will be derived from those principles. Another hadith in this regard is this hadith, لَيْسَ لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ حَقٍّ, which applies to the case of ghars, to plant trees, not crops. To plant trees, not crops. Means what? لَيْسَ, no, لِعِرْقِ ظَالِمٍ or لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ. حق, sacredness. So, لَيْسَ حق means there is no sacredness. لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ, for an unjust root. There is no sacredness for an unjust root. Meaning an unjust root, when you basically plant your trees in my property, your root is an unjust root. Or لِعِرْقِ ظَالِمٍ, to the root of an unjust person. That root has to be removed. Even though in Islam there is some sacredness for trees. You know that? ما قطعتم مدينة أو تركتموها قائمة على أصولها فبإذن الله. Whatever palm tree that you have cut off or left standing, it was by the permission of Allah. This means that you cannot cut a palm tree except with the permission of Allah. So trees have sacredness. And certainly hayawanat, animals, have greater sacredness. A much greater sacredness. So there is, like if you are in a safina, if you are in a ship, and they specifically mention this, and you have property and you have hayawanat on the ship with you, you have to throw away all the property before you throw out the animals. And you don't throw out the animals unless the risk to humans is real. Then you start to throw out the animals. So, but you have to throw away out the property first, the inanimate objects first, and then anyway. So there is sacredness for roots, there is sacredness for trees, but an unjust root, a root that was planted unjustly, wrongfully in my property, in my land, does not have sacredness. Therefore, can be removed. So this is one hadith here about the planting. لَيْسَ لِعِرْقٍ ظَالِمٍ حَقٍّ. There is no sacredness for an unjust root or plant. Okay, now there is another hadith here that does not talk about ghars, but talks about zara, not planting trees but crops. And the difference here, and as we will come to see in fiqh, is that there is a difference between planting trees, because if I let you use the trees, it means I have to let you basically pick the fruits for the next 50 or 60 years or 100 years. It's my land, But if it is crops, then it's only one season, so we'll have to talk about this. So this hadith, من زرع في أرض قوم, has a little bit of controversial authenticity. من زرع في أرض قوم بغير إذنهم فليس له من الزرع شيء وله نفقته. Whoever زرع, planted or sowed or cultivated the land of في أرضي, in the land, قوم, people, بغير, without, إذنهم, their permission, فليس, then there is no, له, for him, من الزرع, of the crops, شيء, anything, وله, and for him, نفقته, whatever he spent. He's entitled to whatever he spent. So the misappropriator will be entitled to what he spent, because he bought the seeds and so on. Keep in mind, this is a little surprising, because you want to penalize the misappropriator. But Islam at the end of the day also recognizes that the misappropriator is a human being. He does have some rights, and whether the judge will determine that he deserves a discretionary punishment or not, that is But you should separate between the two, because the misappropriator many times thinks that they're right. They took that piece of land, or they took that property by force, not always out of aggression. Sometimes they may think that they are entitled, but they were found to not be entitled. And since they are found to not be entitled, we will consider them to be misappropriators, ghasib, wrongful, appropriator. But could they often think that they are entitled? Yes, they could be thinking that they are entitled. It could be a dispute between the two, and the misappropriator thought they're entitled. So all of this has to be sorted out by the judge. And the judge may apply a penalty, a discretionary punishment, ta'zir, to the misappropriator if he sees that there is aggression that needs to be sort of punished. But the misappropriator is not treated like unhuman or someone who has no rights whatsoever. No. If he took that piece of land by force because he thought that, yes, that is part of his land, not the other guy's land, and planted in that piece of land because they disagreed over the border between the two properties, for instance, or something, and planted in that piece of land, he will be entitled to what he spent, not his work. But he will be entitled to what he spent. He purchased the seeds for this much. He purchased that. So he will be entitled to what he spent.
Not the watering. The watering also.
That is not what he spent. That is his work. As you know. So that is what nafaqatihi means. But then Ibn Qudamah here he will say that he will take it. He will take it he will take the crops at the current value, at the current value of the crops before they come to maturity, because we'll come and talk about it. So then that's another hadith. That's another hadith that applies to this particular chapter. Finally, when it comes to daman, because daman or liability is connected to this chapter, you remember when you all remember this because everybody talks about this, about the forbearance of the Prophet with his wives when Aisha broke the dish that Zainab sent when the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with his companions, and Zainab sent a dish that had food, and Aisha took it and broke it. What the Prophet ﷺ did is that he returned to Zainab Aisha's dish and kept the broken dish for Aisha. So that basically swap was basically just, because Aisha is the one who broke it, which means that the concept of compensating people is a legitimate concept. You compensate people for the harm, the damage, the loss you cause to their property. Because sometimes in certain parts of the Muslim world, to take a compensation is not sort of befitting or something like this. But that is not really Islamic. Taking a compensation for some wrongdoing is completely fine and completely befitting. If you want to forgive that, that's absolutely fine. But you should not make it sort of demeaning to people to take compensation for the loss or the damage their property suffered by the wrongdoing or the negligence of others. فرد الصحيح مع الرسول وحبس المكسورة means that he returned the good dish with a messenger that was sent by Zainab and kept al-maksura, kept the broken one for Aisha. And that's it. These are the hadith that talk about this, the chapter. From these hadith, the principles, the fuqaha, but not only from these hadith, because they also have the grid. These hadith will be used on the grid that they have. The grid is basically the principles of fiqh. The principles of Islamic law is the grid that they have in their mind, and now they will apply those ahadith with that grid in mind and derive rulings, and these are the rulings that they're driving. So the Imam ibn Qudamah then talks about the two different scenarios. When you wrongfully appropriate land, you can build on it, you can plant trees or crops. So إن غصب أرضا فغرسها أخذ بقلع غرسه وردها وأرش نقصها وأجرتها. When one unlawfully seizes a plot of land and plants trees on it, one must pull the trees out, give back the land, and pay a fine for any decrease caused by the planting, because the owner will need to fix, after you have plucked the trees out, the owner will need to fix the land so that he can replant it, together with its rent. So you misappropriated the land for 6 months. 6 months you have misappropriated the land. You planted mango trees in my land. You need to pluck the mango trees out. You need to give me the rent of 6 months. Certainly you need to give me the land, but also you need to give me compensation because after you pluck the mango trees out of the land will need some work to return it back to where I could utilize it for my own purposes. Then the Sheikh said, وإن زرعها وأخذ keep in mind that building takes the same ruling as well. Building takes the same ruling. So if you build on the land, you will have to demolish the building. But certainly, he can ask you to demolish the building. If they agree on leaving, then it is between them. It's among them. It's like a mutual agreement. But if the landlord, if the rightful owner of the land requires you to demolish the building, you need to demolish the building. And then you need to pay for returning the land to the status that it was in prior to building. So building and planting trees will take the same rulings. Planting crops is a little bit different. وإن زرعها وأخذ الغاصب الزرع ردها وأجرتها وإن أدرك الزرع قبل حصاده خير بين ذلك وبين أخذ الزرع بقيمته. If the extorter plants on it and takes the harvest, then he or she must return the extorted land and pays its rent. Now, unlike the first scenario, this is not about planting trees, this is about crops, that only will stay there for one season. So we will treat them a little bit differently. If he already harvested the crops, if the extorter, the misappropriator, already harvested the crops, he will have to return the land and what? Rent. Market value. Yes, land and rent only. Land and rent. We said that it is up to the judge to determine if he wants to impose a discretionary punishment on this person. Why is it up to the judge? Because like I said, misappropriator, you could be at one point a misappropriator. It's not like, the very evil people. No, it could be misappropriation because of misunderstanding at some point. It could be misappropriation because I felt that you have taken, that you moved, I was under the impression that the flags between my land and yours were moved by you. Someone told me, so I think, etc. So it's not always like, so the misappropriator is not going to be treated like a criminal with no rights all the time. We have to determine if they are. And if they are subject to discretionary punishment. But when it comes to the civil case has to be based on equity. There's a civil case and a criminal case, right? So the civil case, when it comes to rights and obligations and so on, the civil case has to be based on equity. Yes, we will be stricter. We're not giving them profit. We're taking, this zara in particular, we will allow them to take the harvest. But we will take the rent. But in general, in other scenarios where it was not that the extorter did so much work, like in Zara, like if it is an apartment that he rented it out, we will take all the rent and give it to the owner. So there is a little bit of difference between Zara, which is farming, and renting out an apartment or renting out a car or something of that nature. Zara, we will give them, if they already harvested the crops, we will give them the crops, but we will take the rent from them at the market value and have them return the land. And certainly they need to make sure that they return the land in the same state or status that was in prior to their extortion of the land or misappropriation of the land. But if the zara has not been harvested, the crops have not been harvested, and that's the last scenario that the Sheikh mentions here. وَإِنْ أَدْرَكَ الزَّرْعَ قَبْلَ حَصَادِهِ خُيِّرَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ وَبَيْنَ أَخْذِ الزَّرْعِ بِقِيمَتِهِ. If the owner regains control of his or her land before the plants have been harvested, the owner is given the choice of either having the harvest for the one who unlawfully planted it, or taking it and paying the extorter its value. So because of the sacredness of the plants, why are we not saying here, demolish it? Why are we not saying here, why are we saying to him, wait until harvest? Wait until harvest time. Because it is reasonable. It is not like they planted trees and he's going to basically be in control of my land for the next 60 years. These are just crops. And it is one season, and then I will regain control over my land. And if he planted the land because of the sacredness of the plants, we keep them until they grow, until they mature, and then they are harvested. And then after you harvest them, we keep them until they're harvested. We don't, mow the plants just because we want to do it, unless you could prove that there is like a particular reason why you need the land. But otherwise, you keep the plants. Then you're either entitled, you allow the extorter to harvest the crops because he is the one who planted and taken care of them. You allow the extorter to harvest the crops and take the rent, or you take control of the land and the crops, but pay him the value at the time you regained control of the land, the value of the crops, which would be small, because it's not the value of the crops at maturity, it is the value of the crops now. I regained control of the land now. I, as a landlord or an owner, I have the choice, I have the right to choose between two things. Allow this person to harvest the crops, wait until they harvest the crops, and take the rent for all the period that this land was extorted, or say, no, I want my land, leave it, and leave the crops, and how much did you spend on this, or the value of the crops, in all honesty. They're saying that I will pay the value of the crop at the time of my resumption of control over the land, or the resumption of the control of the rightful owner over their land. So, to summarize, the concept that we have to understand here, certainly the prohibition of wrongful seizure is, but again, at the same time, there is a difference between establishing justice and punitive measures. And the misappropriator is not always that evil, sinister person. Sometimes it could be a misunderstanding. So we have to sort these two departments out of each other, establishing justice as in the civil case, and punishing the extorter or the misappropriator for their wrongdoing. But even when it comes to establishing justice in the civil case, we said that we will be stricter with the misappropriator than we are with the trustee, than we are with the borrower, and so on. So there is a difference. The one thing that we also need to remember is that the hadith are not so many, and that applies to sort of the most of the, outside of the area of worship, and to a lesser extent the area of family. The hadith provide the grid, the guidelines, the blueprint, the mold, and then, you know, then the fuqaha come with principles, and then they come with detailed rulings from those hadith. The principle that will not be upheld here in this chapter is al-Kharaj bid-Daman. Profit follows liability. Here in this chapter, profit will not follow liability, because the misappropriator will be liable, responsible for all liability, and not entitled to profit. And that's it. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We will take 5 minutes for people to leave, and then start our Q&A session. Inshallah.